Welcome to Nachtmeier Witness. Some nights feel wrong before anything happens. The air feels heavy, the room feels colder, and somewhere in the dark, you get the strange feeling that you are being watched. Tonight, you will hear stories from people who became witnesses to things they never expected to see. Some saw someone standing in the shadows. Some heard voices with no one nearby. Others found themselves in places that did not feel real at all. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy true scary stories with a slow, dark atmosphere, subscribe to Nachtmeier Witness. Get comfortable. The night has already begun. A few years ago, my friend and I went walking through Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx. Anyone who has spent time in New York City knows how strange it can feel to find a place there that actually seems quiet and cut off from everything. Most of the time, the city is always around you. Even when you are in a park, you can usually still hear traffic somewhere in the distance, or see apartment buildings through the trees, or catch sight of concrete paths, fences, playgrounds, or people passing by. New York is the kind of place that constantly reminds you that you are surrounded by millions of other people. But Van Cortlandt Park has areas where that feeling changes. There is a huge cluster of trees in that park, and once you get deep enough inside, the city almost disappears. The buildings are gone from view. The concrete fades behind you. The sounds of traffic become softer and more distant until, for a little while, you can actually forget where you are. You can forget that you are still in the Bronx. You can forget that there are streets and stores and trains not that far away. Inside those trees, it can feel like you have stepped into some separate pocket of the world. That was part of why we were there. We were not doing anything special. We were just walking, talking, and exploring like people do when they have time and curiosity. It was not supposed to be scary. It was not some planned ghost hunt or dare. We were not looking for anything strange. We were simply wandering through the trees, enjoying that strange feeling of being hidden inside the city. At first, everything seemed normal. The trees were thick around us, and the ground was uneven in places, covered with dirt, leaves, sticks, and patches of low plants. The air felt different under the canopy, cooler and heavier than it did out near the streets. Every now and then, we could hear birds or insects, maybe the distant voice of someone far away, but mostly, it was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels rare in New York. We kept moving deeper, following no real path, just stepping between trees and around brush. I remember how easy it was to lose track of direction in there. Once you are surrounded by trees, everything starts to look similar. One patch of trunks looks like another. A small slope or dip in the ground can make you feel like you have gone farther than you actually have. It was not wilderness exactly, but it was enough to make the city feel far away. Then, we came to a clearing. It opened suddenly in front of us, maybe around 25 feet across. After moving through the trees, it felt strange to step into an open space like that. There was enough room for a small group of people to gather, and it was immediately obvious that people had been there before us. Not just passing through, either. They had used the place. They had stayed there. In the middle of the clearing were the remains of a bonfire. It looked like it had burned down some time before, leaving behind blackened wood, ash, and a dark, messy circle on the ground. Around the fire pit were boxes and crates, arranged in a rough circle like seats. Some were broken down, some still looked sturdy enough to sit on, and they gave the whole place the feeling of a hidden camp. Not the kind of camp where kids tell stories and roast marshmallows, but the kind of place where people who did not want to be seen had gathered at night. That alone made me uneasy. There was something about finding a setup like that deep in the trees that immediately changed the mood. A clearing in the woods can feel peaceful if it is empty, but when you find signs that people have been using it, especially in a place where you cannot see the city around you, it starts to feel private in the wrong way, like you have walked into someone else's space, like you are not supposed to be there. But the bonfire and the crates were not the worst part. Off to one side of the clearing was a large pile of clear plastic garbage bags and plastic sheeting. At first, I did not fully understand what I was looking at. It was just a heap of plastic, crumpled together and shining a little where light hit it through the trees. But as we got closer, the details became impossible to ignore. The plastic was covered in flies and bugs. I do not mean a few flies buzzing around like you might see near garbage. I mean the plastic was absolutely covered. They crawled across the surface in thick clusters, moving over each other, lifting and landing, swarming around the folds of the bags. The sound of them was a low, constant buzzing that seemed to fill the clearing. Once I noticed it, I could not stop hearing it. And then there was the smell. It hit us hard. It was awful in a way that is difficult to explain unless you have smelled something truly rotten before. It was not just normal trash. It was not spoiled food in a garbage can or something dead by the side of the road. It was heavier than that, warmer, sour and sweet and rotten all at once. The kind of smell that makes your body react before your mind can explain it. My stomach turned, and I remember wanting to cover my nose, but also feeling too stunned to move at first. The bags and plastic sheeting appeared to be filled with some kind of red-purple gunk. It was thick-looking and wet, and it had leaked out of the bags in several places. The liquid had spread around the pile, forming a fairly large puddle on the ground. The color was horrible. Not bright red like fresh paint or ketchup, but a dark reddish-purple mess that looked organic in the worst possible way. It had soaked into the dirt in places and collected in low spots around the plastic. The flies loved it. That was what made it so disturbing. Whatever was inside those bags, whatever that leaking mess was, it was attracting bugs like something dead. It looked like the kind of pile you should not touch, the kind of pile you should immediately walk away from and maybe tell someone about. Every instinct in my body was telling me to back up, but my friend did the opposite. While I stood there staring, trying to understand what we had found, he picked up a big stick from the ground. I knew what he was going to do before he did it, and I remember thinking he was insane. He was curious in that reckless way people sometimes are when they are trying to act brave. Maybe he wanted to prove it was nothing. Maybe he thought it was just old food waste, paint, or some kind of garbage dumped by weird people. Maybe he was as scared as I was and wanted to turn fear into action. He walked toward the pile with the stick in his hand. I wanted to tell him not to. Maybe I did. I cannot remember if the words came out or if I just stood there frozen. My attention was locked on the bags, the flies, the puddle, and the way the plastic seemed to cling around whatever was inside. Everything about it felt wrong. It felt like we were looking at something we were never meant to find. My friend reached the pile and stretched the stick out toward it. The stick touched the plastic. He pushed into the bags. For a second, nothing happened. The plastic shifted a little under the pressure, making a wet, crinkling sound. Flies rose up in a buzzing cloud, then settled again. The smell seemed to get even worse when the pile moved, like something trapped inside had been disturbed. Then something inside the top bag moved. It was not a small movement. It was not the plastic settling or air escaping. Something large inside the bag moved, as if it had kicked. The whole top section jerked. At the same moment, a sound came from inside the pile. I still do not like thinking about that sound. It was not a clear scream. It was not a growl. It was not a normal animal noise that I could recognize. It was something between a whimper and a moan, all mixed together in one awful, weak, pained sound. It sounded alive, but barely. It sounded like something that was trapped, hurt, and too exhausted to make a full cry. My friend jumped back immediately. For a split second, neither of us moved after that. We just stared at the bag. My mind was racing, but it could not land on anything. I wanted it to be an animal. I wanted it to be a dog, a raccoon, a deer, anything that made the situation horrible but understandable. But the sound did not fit cleanly into any animal I knew. It had a strange human quality to it, or maybe that was just the fear getting into my head. Whatever was in that bag had moved. Whatever was in that bag had made a noise. And whatever was in that bag was surrounded by bloody-looking plastic, flies, rotten stink, and a puddle of red-purple liquid in the middle of a hidden clearing in the Bronx. That was when the man appeared. He came into view on the other side of the clearing. I do not know where he had been before that. Maybe he had been hidden in the trees, watching us. Maybe he had just arrived at the worst possible moment. But suddenly, he was there, standing across from us near the edge of the clearing. He looked like he had never had a bath in his life. His clothes were torn and filthy, hanging off him in dirty pieces. They were covered in stains that I do not even want to think about too much. There was blood on him. There was what looked like shit on him. His whole appearance was so shocking that my brain had trouble accepting that he was a real person. He looked less like someone living in the park and more like someone from a nightmare. Someone who had stepped out of the trees because we had disturbed his place. In his hand, he was holding a big stick, almost like a walking stick. But it was not just a normal stick. At the top of it was an animal skull. The skull was stuck onto the end like some kind of symbol or trophy. I did not get a long look at it because everything happened so fast, but I saw enough to know what it was. A long stick with a skull on top, held by a filthy man covered in blood and waste, standing near a pile of plastic bags that had just moved and moaned. There are moments in life where your body makes decisions before your mind has time to finish the thought. This was one of those moments. The man took one step toward us. That was all it took. We ran. We did not ask who he was. We did not ask what was in the bag. We did not try to help whatever had made that sound. We did not stand our ground or threaten him or call out. The second he stepped toward us, every survival instinct we had kicked in at full force, and we ran in the opposite direction as fast as our bodies could move. I have never run like that before or since. I remember branches whipping past us. I remember the ground feeling uneven under my feet. I remember not caring if I tripped or got scratched or ran straight into something. My only thought was to get away from that clearing and away from that man. My legs moved faster than I thought they could. If my old PE coach had seen me run that day, he would have been shocked. I was not athletic in that way. Not usually. But fear can pull something out of you that nothing else can. We did not stop after a few feet. We kept going. We ran through the trees, not really knowing where we were headed at first, just trying to put distance between us and what we had found. Every sound behind us felt like it might be him following. Every snapping branch made my stomach drop. I do not know if he chased us. I never turned around long enough to check. I was too afraid that if I looked back, I would see him crashing through the trees behind us with that skull-topped stick in his hand. Eventually, the trees began to thin. The city slowly came back into existence around us. Buildings appeared through gaps in the branches. The sound of traffic became clearer. Concrete paths and open spaces started to feel real again. I cannot describe the relief of seeing normal things. People, streets, the outside world. It felt like we had escaped from somewhere that should not have existed inside the city. We did not tell anyone. Looking back, maybe we should have. That is the part that bothers me now. We should have called someone. We should have reported it. We should have told the police or park workers or anyone who could check that clearing. But at the time, we were scared and confused. We were also young enough to convince ourselves that staying out of it was easier. We told ourselves we did not know what we had seen. We told ourselves maybe it was not as bad as it looked. We told ourselves that going back or getting involved could bring trouble we did not want. So we kept quiet, and we never went back. Not once. For a while afterward, my friend and I tried to explain it to ourselves. We told ourselves it was an animal in the bag. That was the explanation we clung to, because it was the least horrifying one. Maybe some poor animal had been hurt or trapped by crazy people in the park. Maybe the red-purple liquid was animal blood, or some disgusting waste, or something else that looked worse than it was. Maybe the man was some unstable person living in the woods who had done something cruel to an animal and did not want us near it. That was bad enough, but it was still easier to live with than the other possibilities. The problem is the sound. I have heard animals make strange noises before. Dogs, cats, raccoons, deer, injured animals, scared animals. They can make sounds that are awful and surprising. But I have never heard an animal make a noise like the one that came from that bag. It was too strange. Too close to a human whimper. Too much like pain trying to become a voice. Maybe fear changed the way I remember it. Maybe in that moment, surrounded by flies and rotten stink, with a filthy man holding a skull-topped stick appearing across the clearing, my brain turned an animal noise into something more disturbing. That is possible. I understand memory can be shaped by fear, but even now, after all these years, I still remember that sound clearly enough to know why it stayed with me. It did not sound right. The whole scene did not feel right. The hidden clearing, the bonfire remains, the boxes and crates arranged around it like seats, the plastic bags and sheeting covered in bugs, the dark liquid leaking out and pooling on the ground, the movement inside the bag, the weak moaning sound, the man stepping out of the trees, filthy and stained, carrying that stick with a skull on top. It all felt like we had walked into the middle of something. Not an accident, not random trash, something. I have thought about that clearing many times since then. I wonder who had been there around that fire. I wonder what they were doing. I wonder why those bags were piled there, what was inside them, and whether whatever moved was still alive when we ran. That thought is the worst one. The idea that something might have needed help and we left. But then I remember the man, and I remember how fast he appeared, and I know that staying could have gotten us hurt or worse. Fear makes simple choices for you. Run or stay. Live or risk it. In that moment, we ran. Part of me still feels guilty for not telling anyone. Another part of me understands exactly why we stayed quiet. We were scared, and we did not know how to explain it without sounding insane. What would we have said? That we found a pile of bloody bags in the woods, poked it with a stick, heard something moan inside, and then a man covered in blood and filth came out carrying a skull staff? It sounds unbelievable even to me, and I was there. But unbelievable does not mean it did not happen. We both saw it. We both heard it. We both ran. To this day, I am not sure what was inside that bag. Maybe it really was an animal. Maybe that is the best and most likely explanation. Some poor animal that had been caught, hurt, or left there by people who were not right in the head. I hope that is all it was, even though that is already horrible. But I cannot say that with confidence. The noise that came from the bag has never left me. Sometimes when I think about it, I can still hear that weak, awful sound in my mind, half whimper and half moan, trapped under plastic in a clearing, hidden inside one of the busiest cities in the world. And every time I remember it, I also remember the man taking that one step toward us. That was the moment the city stopped feeling close. That was the moment the trees around us felt too thick, the clearing too hidden, and the world too far away. For a few seconds, it did not matter that we were in New York City. It did not matter that buildings and roads were somewhere beyond the trees. In that clearing, we were alone with something we were never supposed to find, and we ran like our lives depended on it. I never believed in ghosts when I was a kid. I was not the kind of person who heard a strange sound in the house and immediately thought something paranormal was happening. If a floor creaked, it was just the house settling. If a door moved, it was probably the air. If somebody told me they had seen something strange, I would listen, but deep down I usually thought there had to be some normal explanation. Ghost stories were fun to hear, but I did not really believe they happened to normal people in normal houses. That changed when I was 11 years old. For a couple of weeks, right before my mom and I moved out of our house, a series of things happened that I still cannot explain. I know how it sounds when I tell people. Some people look at me like they do not know what to say. Some laugh a little because they think I am joking. Some try to find logical explanations, and I understand that, because I would probably do the same thing if someone else told me this story. But I swear this was the strangest period of my life, and I remember enough of it to know that something was happening in that house. At the time, my family had already gone through a big change. My parents had divorced, and everything in life felt unsettled because of it. We were living in a town about 15 or 20 minutes away from where some of our family lived. After the divorce, my mom decided that we should move closer to them. It also meant I would be closer to my father, who had moved after the divorce. So the decision was made. We were going to leave that house and start over somewhere nearby. Moving is always stressful, but when you are 11, it feels different. Adults are focused on packing, money, paperwork, and plans. Kids feel the emotional side of it more quietly. Your room is being emptied. Your routine is changing. The house you know is becoming boxes and bare walls. Even if you are excited about the new place, there is still a strange sadness that comes with leaving. I remember that time feeling tense already, even before anything weird started happening. Once it became official that we were moving, strange things began. The first thing was the smell of coffee. That may not sound scary at first, but in our house it made no sense. My mom and I did not drink coffee. We were not the kind of family that had coffee brewing every morning. There was no pot left on, no bag of beans being opened, no fresh grounds in the kitchen. Coffee was not part of our normal daily life, so when we started waking up to the smell of coffee coming from the kitchen, it was immediately strange. And it was not a faint smell either. It was strong, extremely strong. It smelled like someone had brewed the biggest batch of coffee imaginable. The scent would fill the kitchen and spread through the house so heavily that it felt like there had to be a coffee maker running somewhere. It was that fresh, bitter, roasted smell that people who drink coffee probably love, but for us it was confusing and unsettling because there was no source. At first, my mom thought there must be a reasonable explanation. Maybe something in the pantry had broken open. Maybe there was some old food or drink mix that smelled like coffee. Maybe a container had spilled behind something. She did not jump to ghosts or anything dramatic. She went into practical mode and started checking the kitchen. She cleaned out the food pantry to see if anything had opened or gone bad. She looked through everything, moved boxes, checked containers, and searched for anything that could have caused such a strong smell. There was nothing. No coffee, no spilled grounds, no broken package. Nothing that explained why our kitchen smelled like someone had been brewing coffee all morning, but the smell kept coming back. Every now and then, we would wake up, and there it was again. That same strong coffee smell in the kitchen. It did not happen every single morning, but it happened enough that it became part of the strange pattern in the house. My mom thought it was weird, and I did too, but at that point it was more confusing than frightening. A smell, even a strange one, is easy to ignore if nothing else is happening. Then it got closer to our moving date. In the last 4 or 5 days before we moved, the house changed at night. That was when things became much harder to dismiss. I started hearing footsteps in the hallway. I would be in bed, trying to sleep, and then I would hear someone walking outside my room. It was not a loud, heavy stomping, but it was clear enough that I knew what it sounded like. Footsteps in the hall. Someone moving slowly through the house. At first, I thought it had to be my mom. That was the obvious answer. Maybe she had gotten up to use the bathroom. Maybe she was checking something in the house. Maybe she could not sleep because of the move. But then I would hear something else. Sobbing, quiet crying, like someone was standing or walking in the hallway, trying not to be too loud but unable to stop themselves. It was not a dramatic scream or anything like that. It was a soft, sad, sobbing sound, and somehow that made it worse. It sounded human. It sounded close. It sounded like someone was grieving in the dark right outside my room. The first time I heard it, I got up and opened my bedroom door. I expected to see my mom in the hall. Maybe she was upset about the move or the divorce or something else. I was young, but I knew adults cried too. So I opened the door and looked out. Nobody was there. The hallway was empty. That should have made the sound stop in my mind, but it did not. The worst part was that even after I opened the door and saw no one, the house still felt wrong. I shut the door and went back to my bed, but I could still hear the quiet sobbing. It was faint, but it was there, like it was coming from somewhere in the hallway, or maybe from just beyond the walls. I remember lying there, trying to decide if I was really hearing it, or if my brain was making it up because I was scared. The next day, I asked my mom if she had heard anything. She said she had not noticed anything. That did not make me feel better. If she had heard it too, at least I would have known I was not imagining it. But because she had not, I was left alone with it. I was 11 years old, and I was starting to feel like there was something in the house that only I was hearing at night. Then it happened again the next night. This time I was already scared before it even started. I remember lying there, waiting, hoping I would not hear it again. But eventually the footsteps came back. Then the sobbing, the same quiet crying in the hallway. I did not want to open the door this time. I did not want to see the empty hall again, because that somehow felt worse than seeing a person there. So I hid under my blankets. That is what you do when you are a kid and fear gets too big. You pull the covers over your head like they are a shield. Part of you knows a blanket cannot protect you from anything real, but another part of you believes that as long as you cannot see the room cannot see you. I stayed under the blankets, scared and frozen, trying not to listen. Eventually, my mind wandered away from the fear, or maybe I just got too exhausted to stay awake, and I fell asleep. Another night, it happened again, but this time, something was different. I had forgotten to shut my bedroom door before going to sleep. I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, and that same quiet sobbing. Because my door was open, the sounds felt closer, less separated from me. I remember waking up and realizing the door was not closed, and fear immediately rushed through me. I got out of bed and shut it, trying to make the room feel safer. But when I turned away from the door, I felt very strange. It is hard to describe that feeling in a way that makes sense. It was not just fear, it was not just being nervous because of the noises. It was the feeling that someone was in the room with me. The air felt different, heavier somehow. My skin felt alert. I could not see anyone, but every part of me felt like I was not alone. I got back into bed and tried to fall asleep. For a while, I just lay there in the dark, trying to calm myself down. I listened for the sobbing. At first, I could still hear it faintly, or I thought I could, but after some time, I noticed that the sobbing was not as noticeable anymore. Maybe it had stopped. Maybe it had moved farther away. Maybe I was just too scared to hear anything clearly. I opened my eyes and looked toward the door. When I did, I saw something from the corner of my eye. An old woman was sitting at the end of my bed. I did not stare at her for a long time. It happened too fast. I saw her in my peripheral vision, clear enough to understand what I was seeing, and then I immediately snapped my eyes directly toward the foot of the bed. The moment I looked straight at her, she disappeared. But I know what I saw. There was an old woman sitting there. Not standing in the doorway, not floating. Sitting on the end of my bed like she had been there quietly watching me. She was there just long enough for my brain to register her shape, her age, and her presence. Then she was gone. The feeling in the room did not disappear with her. That was what scared me even more. Even though I could no longer see her, I still felt like someone was there. That heavy, watched feeling stayed around me. I was too scared to stay in my room after that. I got out of bed and went to my mom's room. I crawled in with her and slept there for the rest of the night. At that point, I was already convinced something was wrong with our house. I was not trying to be brave anymore. I was not trying to explain everything away. I had heard walking in the hallway. I had heard sobbing. I had seen an old woman sitting on my bed, and we were only days away from moving. But the strangest part happened during the last couple of nights before the weekend we moved. This is the part that always makes people either look freaked out or look at me like I am crazy. I understand why. It sounds ridiculous. If I had not seen it myself, I do not know if I would believe it either, but I swear it happened. I woke up because my mom came into my room. She was panicking. She was standing there, scared and confused, pointing at her chest and asking me, "Do you see this?" At first, I did not understand what she meant. I was still half asleep, trying to wake up and process why she was in my room so upset. Then I looked where she was pointing. There was a green orb glowing from her chest. It was not bright like a flashlight, but it was vivid enough to see clearly in the dark. It was dim, but very real, and it looked like a green glowing circle or orb coming from the area of her chest. I remember how strange it looked, because it did not seem like normal light shining on her. It looked like the glow was connected to her somehow, like it was coming from her rather than reflecting off of her. My mom kept asking if I could see it because she honestly felt like she was losing her mind. I told her I could. That scared her even more, but I think it also gave her some relief because at least she knew she was not imagining it. She immediately started trying to rule out normal explanations. She changed her shirt to make sure she was not wearing something glow in the dark. She moved around the house into different rooms to see if some light source was shining on her from somewhere. She checked different angles, different lighting, different places. No matter where she went, the green orb was still glowing from her chest. It stayed there. That was when my mom became truly freaked out. Not just confused, not just uneasy, but scared in a way I had never seen before. Adults try to hide fear from kids, but that night she could not hide it. She asked me to sleep with her, and she told me that if any weird paranormal stuff started happening, I should immediately run to the neighbors and call the police. That instruction terrified me because it meant she was taking it seriously. She was not telling me it was nothing. She was not brushing it off. She was scared enough to make a plan in case something else happened. Eventually, the green glow faded away. After it disappeared, we were both calm enough to go to sleep, though I do not know how restful that sleep could have been. By then, the house felt like it was full of something we did not understand. We were almost out, but those last nights felt longer than they should have. The next morning, my mom took off. She did not just ignore what had happened. She went to someone in town who dealt with ghosts or psychic stuff. I do not know exactly what title that person used. Psychic, medium, ghost expert, spiritual worker, something like that. Our town was actually known for being haunted, so it was not completely random that a business or service like that existed there. There were people who took supernatural things seriously, and after what happened, my mom wanted answers. From what my mom later told me, this person did some research and checked records related to the house. According to what they found, years and years before we lived there, an old widowed woman had lived in that house. The details matched our experiences in a way that made everything feel even stranger. Apparently, this woman was known in the neighborhood as a heavy coffee drinker. She used to sit on her porch all the time, drinking coffee and watching the world go by. That immediately connected to the coffee smell we had been waking up to for weeks. My mom and I did not drink coffee. There was no coffee in the house causing that smell. But this old woman had been known for drinking it constantly. She was also said to have loved children. According to the psychic or the records my mom heard about, the woman always wished she had grandchildren to take care of. She had been widowed, and from the way it was described, she seemed like someone who had a lot of love to give, but maybe not the family life she had wanted. Eventually, she died in the house, most likely from natural causes. When my mom told the psychic about the crying, the explanation she was given was that the old woman was sad because we were leaving. That was why the sobbing was heard in the hallways. She had gotten used to us being there, especially me as a child, and now we were moving away. The idea was that she did not want us to leave, or at least that our leaving made her lonely again. That explanation changed the way I thought about the crying. At the time, the sobbing had terrified me. Hearing someone cry in the hallway at night when nobody was there is not something an 11-year-old can process calmly. But later, when I heard that she may have been an old woman who loved kids and felt sad about us leaving, it made the sound feel different. Still creepy, yes, but also sad. Maybe she was not trying to scare me. Maybe she was grieving. The psychic also said something about the green orb. According to what my mom told me, the green orb glowing from her chest was supposed to be some kind of blessing, a blessing of the old woman's soul passed to my mother. The psychic said it was a specific kind of blessing used or recognized throughout supernatural history, or something along those lines. I will be honest, when my mom started explaining that part, it got a little too wild and strange for me. I was still a kid, and even though I believed something had happened, the deeper supernatural explanation was a lot to take in. I did not fully understand it then, and I am not sure I would fully understand it now. What I chose to believe was simpler. I liked to believe the old woman was a good ghost, not some creepy old woman trying to scare us, not something evil hiding in the house, just an old spirit who had lived there, loved coffee, loved children, and had grown attached to us before we moved away. Maybe the coffee smell was her presence. Maybe the crying was her sadness. Maybe sitting at the end of my bed was not meant to frighten me, but to be close. Maybe the green orb was her way of saying goodbye to my mom, or giving her something before we left. That version feels better to me. Still, even if she was good, The experience was terrifying while it was happening. I was 11. I did not know the backstory. I did not know about the widowed woman, or the coffee, or the porch, or her love for children. All I knew was that our house smelled like coffee. When no one made coffee, someone was walking and crying in the hallway at night. An old woman appeared at the end of my bed, and my mom woke me up with a glowing green orb on her chest. That is a lot for a kid. After we moved, things stopped. At least nothing like that followed us. The weirdness seemed connected to that house and to those final weeks before we left. That timing is one of the reasons I believe there was something there. It did not happen the whole time we lived there, or at least not in such a strong way. It seemed to become active when we were preparing to move, as if our leaving triggered it. Maybe the old woman knew we were going. Maybe she felt the house changing. Boxes being packed, rooms being emptied, routines ending. Maybe spirits, if they exist, understand change in their own way. Maybe she had watched us for years and knew the house was about to become empty again. If she loved children and always wished for grandchildren, maybe having me there had meant something to her. That thought makes the story less scary and more heartbreaking. Of course, not everyone believes it. Like I said, most people do not know what to think when I tell them. Some believe me because they have had their own experiences. Some think it is interesting, but probably exaggerated. Others clearly think there must be some rational explanation for every part of it. And maybe there is. Maybe the coffee smell came from somewhere outside or from a neighbor. Maybe sound traveled strangely through the house and I mistook something else for crying. Maybe I saw a shadow or a half-dream image at the end of my bed. Maybe the green orb was some kind of reflection, even though my mom changed shirts and moved through different rooms and it stayed with her. Maybe the psychic found a story and connected the dots afterward. I know those explanations exist, but none of them fully satisfy me because I lived through it. I smelled the coffee. I heard the crying. I saw the old woman. I saw the green glow on my mom's chest. And I saw how scared my mom was. That part matters. My mom was not trying to scare me or make up a story. She came into my room genuinely shaken, asking me if I could see what she was seeing because she thought she might be going crazy. I saw it too. That is why I became a believer. Not because I wanted to believe in ghosts, not because I went looking for something paranormal. I became a believer because for a couple of weeks when I was 11 years old, the world stopped behaving the way I thought it should. Our house felt occupied by someone unseen, someone who smelled like coffee, cried in the hallways, sat at the end of my bed, and somehow left my mother glowing with a strange green light before we moved away. It sounds ridiculous. I know it does. Even now, when I say it out loud, part of me understands why people react the way they do. The story starts with coffee smells and hallway crying, and ends with my mom looking like she had a green orb glowing from her chest. It is strange from beginning to end, but it happened. Those were the weirdest couple of weeks of my life, and nothing else I have experienced has ever come close. In the end, I do not think of her as something evil. I think of her as lonely. Maybe that is easier for me. Maybe it is just the story I prefer. But if the psychic was right, and the old woman who died in that house had loved children and wanted grandchildren, then maybe she was never trying to scare us at all. Maybe she was just sad to see us go. Maybe the smell of coffee was her way of being present. Maybe the crying was her goodbye. Maybe the green orb was a blessing. And maybe the old woman at the end of my bed was not there to harm me, but simply to sit near a child one last time before the house became quiet again. The most scared I have ever been in my life happened when I was in the 4th grade. I must have been around 9 or 10 years old at the time, old enough to run around the house thinking I was brave, but still young enough to be completely destroyed by something I did not understand. I have had plenty of moments since then where I was nervous, startled, or uncomfortable, but nothing has ever hit me in the same way as that day. It was not a ghost jumping out at me. It was not someone breaking into the house. It was not a monster in the dark. It was something much simpler, and somehow that made it worse. It was a normal day at first. My mom had gone out to get groceries, and my brothers and I were home by ourselves for a little while. That was always a big deal when we were kids. Being alone in the house without an adult around made us feel like we owned the place. We were not doing anything truly terrible, but in our minds, we were little badasses. We could be loud. We could run around. We could mess with things. We could do all the small things kids do when they know their mom is not there to tell them to stop. The house felt different when she was gone. It felt more open, more free, like the rules had loosened for a short time. My brothers and I were probably laughing, yelling, chasing each other, and doing whatever seemed fun in the moment. I do not remember every detail of what we were doing before it happened, because the moment with the stone completely took over the memory. Everything before that is just a blur of being a kid at home with my brothers, enjoying a few minutes of freedom while our mom was at the store. We had a backyard with a stone walking path that ran through it. It was not fancy, but it was the kind of thing you notice as a kid because it gives you something to jump across, balance on, or follow like a trail. The stones were set into the ground, making a path through the yard. Most of them looked like normal flat stones, the kind of pieces you would expect someone to use for a walkway. But near the door, there was one stone that was different. It was a very large square stone, much bigger and more solid looking than the others. Looking back now, I realize it really did not belong with the rest of the path. It was not the same shape, not the same feel, and not the same kind of stone as the others. It stood out, but at the time, nobody thought anything of it. It was just there. Kids accept things like that. A strange stone in the backyard is just part of the backyard if it has always been there. You do not ask where it came from or why it is different unless something makes you curious. And I was a very curious kid. I was always looking under things, picking up rocks, watching bugs, and trying to figure out what was hiding where adults never looked. I liked seeing what was underneath objects in the yard. There were always bugs under stones, and to a kid that was interesting. Worms, beetles, ants, pill bugs, little crawling things that scattered the second sunlight hit them. I was not scared of that kind of stuff. If anything, I wanted to see it up close. That big square stone had probably been tempting me for a while. It was the biggest one, which meant there had to be something interesting underneath it. In my young mind, the larger the stone, the better the bugs. Maybe there would be a whole colony under there. Maybe something unusual. Maybe a huge beetle. I did not have a deep reason. I was just a kid with too much curiosity and no adult around to tell me to leave it alone. So I decided I was going to lift it. The problem was that the stone was heavy. Even before I tried to move it, I could tell it was not going to be easy. It was large, flat, and settled into the ground like it had been there for a very long time. Dirt had packed around the edges, and grass or weeds may have grown close to it. It did not look like one of the smaller walking stones I could just pick up with my hands. This one was going to take effort. I got a shovel. That was probably the first sign that this was a bad idea, but again, I was 9 or 10. Bad ideas did not feel bad yet. They felt like adventures. I took the shovel and wedged it under the edge of the stone. I pushed down on the handle, trying to pry the stone upward. At first, it barely moved. It was either too heavy, too stuck in the dirt, or both. I kept trying, working the shovel under it, lifting just enough to create a little space. Eventually, I managed to raise one side just enough to get my fingers under the edge. The moment my fingers were under it, I realized the stone was much heavier than I had expected. It was not just a backyard paving stone. It had real weight to it. The kind of weight that makes your arms shake and your fingers feel like they could get crushed if it slipped. I tried to lift it, but I could not. It was too heavy for me alone. Maybe it was stuck deeper than I realized. Maybe years of dirt had locked it in place. Whatever the reason, I was not strong enough to flip it by myself. So I did what kids do when they cannot move something heavy. I got my brothers. I called them over and told them I needed help. I probably made it sound exciting, like there was something cool under the stone. They came over, and the three of us gathered around it. I do not remember exactly how we positioned ourselves, but I remember all of us working together. The shovel had loosened it enough that we could get a grip, or at least get leverage. We pushed, pulled, lifted, and struggled with it. The stone resisted at first. It felt like the ground did not want to let it go. Dirt clung to the underside. The edges scraped against the path. It probably made a rough grinding sound as we shifted it. We were putting all our little kids' strength into moving it, and for a moment I am sure we felt powerful. 3 brothers against one giant stone in the backyard. It was the kind of thing that felt like a mission. Finally, we managed to flip it over. For a second, I was excited. I expected bugs. That was the whole point. I expected to see dirt, worms, beetles, maybe ants rushing around in panic. I was ready to crouch down and inspect the little world that had been hidden underneath that big stone for who knows how long. But that was not what I saw. When the stone turned over, the underside was not plain. There was lettering on it. Brass lettering. At first, my brain did not understand what I was looking at. I was expecting bugs and dirt, not words. The letters were there, set into the stone, dirty and maybe worn but still visible. I stared at them, confused. Why would there be brass letters on the bottom of a stone in our backyard path? Why would anyone put writing on a stepping stone and then place it face down? Then I started reading. The meaning hit me slowly at first, then all at once. It was a tombstone. A fucking tombstone. The big square stone near our door, the one that had been part of our backyard path like it was nothing, was actually a grave marker. At some point, someone had taken a tombstone and used it as a walking stone, turned upside down so the writing would not show. We had been stepping over it, walking past it, living around it without knowing what it was. And now, we had flipped it over and exposed the truth. I cannot fully explain the fear that shot through me in that moment. As an adult, you might have questions. Where did it come from? Was it real? Was it taken from a cemetery? Was it an old marker someone had reused? Was it connected to the property? But as a kid, none of that matters. You do not calmly investigate. You see brass lettering and realize you are staring at a tombstone in your backyard, and your mind goes straight to the worst possible place. Someone was buried there. That was the thought. Whether it was true or not, that was what my 9 or 10-year-old brain believed instantly. Why else would there be a tombstone right by our house? Why would it be in the yard? Why would it be face down? In that moment, I did not think about landscaping or old stones being reused. I thought we had just uncovered something we were never supposed to touch. I felt like we had disturbed a grave. I do not remember what the words on the stone said. I wish I did, but the fear wiped that detail away. Maybe there was a name, maybe dates, maybe some kind of inscription. I only remember seeing the brass lettering and understanding enough to know what it was. That was all I needed. The second my brain formed the word tombstone, My body decided we were done. My brothers understood at almost the same time. There was no long conversation. We did not stand around debating it. We did not carefully flip it back over. We did not go inside and call our mom. We did not try to act brave. All three of us lost our minds in the same instant. We ran. We hauled ass out of that yard like something was chasing us. I remember that sudden burst of panic, the kind that makes your legs move before you even know where you are going. We ran away from the stone, away from the backyard, away from the house. We were not thinking clearly. We just knew we did not want to be near it anymore. The place that had felt like our home a few seconds earlier suddenly felt cursed. The backyard was no longer a backyard. It was the place with a hidden tombstone. We ran all the way across the street and sat on the curb. That is where we waited for our mom. 3 kids sitting on the curb outside their own house, too scared to go back inside because we had found a tombstone in the backyard. I can still picture it. We were probably breathing hard, talking over each other, trying to make sense of what had happened. None of us wanted to be the first one to say we should go back. None of us wanted to check the stone again. We were scared shitless. It is funny in a way now, but it was not funny then. At that age, your imagination fills every empty space with something terrifying. Once we knew there was a tombstone in the yard, everything became possible. Maybe there was a body under it. Maybe the house was built on a grave. Maybe whoever the stone belonged to was angry because we flipped it over. Maybe we had released something. Maybe we were going to be haunted forever because we disturbed the dead while our mom was out buying groceries. Those thoughts sound dramatic now, but to kids, they felt completely real. We sat across the street like that was safe territory. The curb became our shelter. We could see the house from there, but we were far enough away that we felt like we had escaped. I do not remember if we were quiet or if we kept talking. I imagine we did both. At first, we probably panicked out loud, then settled into frightened silence, staring at the house and waiting for our mom's car to come back. Waiting made it worse. Every minute felt longer than it should have. I kept thinking about the stone lying there in the yard, flipped over, the brass letters exposed to the air for the first time in who knows how long. I wondered if we should have put it back. I wondered if leaving it uncovered made things worse. I wondered if our mom would be mad that we had messed with the yard. But mostly I wondered why there was a tombstone there at all. When our mom finally came back, I can only imagine what she saw. Her 3 kids sitting across the street on the curb instead of being inside the house. We must have looked terrified. Maybe she thought someone had gotten hurt or something had happened inside. We probably rushed to her and tried to explain all at once. I do not remember her exact reaction, but I remember the fear of waiting for her more than anything else. The thing about that experience is that it was not supernatural in the obvious sense. We did not see a ghost. We did not hear a voice. Nothing floated through the hallway. But finding a tombstone hidden face down in your backyard as a child is enough to make the entire world feel wrong. It makes you realize that houses and yards can hold secrets. Things can be right under your feet for years, and you never know. Looking back, I can think of normal explanations. Maybe the stone had been discarded and reused by someone who did not care what it was. Maybe it was from an old cemetery that had been moved, and the marker somehow ended up as scrap stone. Maybe it was not marking a grave in our yard at all. Maybe some previous owner found it somewhere and thought the flat side would work as part of a path. Adults do strange, careless things sometimes, especially when something is old and they do not think anyone will notice. But as a child, the normal explanations did not matter. All that mattered was that we had flipped over a stone and found a grave marker. That discovery changed how I saw the backyard. I could not look at that path the same way again. That big square stone had always been there, and for years it had seemed ordinary. After that day, it became the stone. Even if someone flipped it back over, even if an adult told us there was nothing to worry about, I would always know what was underneath. I would always know there was writing on the other side. I hated the idea that we had walked on it. That bothered me almost as much as finding it. Before we knew what it was, we had probably stepped on it countless times. Friends, family, maybe delivery people or neighbors had walked over it without a thought. It had been treated like a regular part of the path, when it had once belonged to someone's grave. Even as a kid, that felt wrong. It felt disrespectful, even though we had not known. And because I was a kid, I also worried that the person whose name was on it knew. I imagined some unseen person watching us from somewhere, angry that their marker had been placed face down in a yard and stepped on by strangers. I imagined them waiting until someone discovered it. I imagined that by flipping it over, we had drawn attention to ourselves. That was the kind of fear that stayed with me after the initial panic faded. Not just the shock of finding the tombstone, but the feeling that we had touched something connected to death. Kids are curious because they do not yet know how often curiosity leads to things they wish they had never seen. That day taught me that not everything hidden under a stone is bugs. Sometimes you lift something expecting worms and beetles, and instead you find a reminder that someone lived, died, and was supposed to be remembered somewhere else. That is what made it so disturbing. A tombstone is not just a piece of rock. It has a purpose. It marks a life. It tells people that someone was here, that they mattered, that this place holds some connection to them. Seeing one used as a stepping stone felt deeply wrong, even before I had the words to explain why. It was like finding a piece of someone's grave treated as yard material. As an adult, that still seems unsettling. I do not know what happened to the stone after that. I do not remember if my mom moved it, left it, called someone, or asked about it. That part of the memory is not clear anymore. The clearest part is the moment we flipped it over and saw the letters. That is the image burned into my mind. The heavy stone rolling onto its back, the dirt shifting, the underside exposed, and those brass letters catching my attention when I expected to see bugs. Then the realization. Then the running. Sometimes I think about how different the memory would be if I had been older. If I had been a teenager, maybe I would have taken a closer look. Maybe I would have written down the name. Maybe I would have told my mom right away and tried to figure out where it came from. If it happened now, I would probably take a picture, search the name, and try to learn the history behind it. But I was in the 4th grade. I did not want history. I wanted to get away. That is why it remains the most scared I have ever been. Not because the situation was the most dangerous thing I have ever faced, but because of how pure the fear was. It was the sudden terror of a child realizing something connected to death had been hidden in the place where he played. There was no preparation for it. One minute I was looking for bugs with my brothers, and the next minute we were staring at a tombstone. The whole thing probably lasted only a few minutes, from the moment I got the shovel to the moment we ran across the street. But in my memory, it stretches out much longer. I can still feel the weight of the stone resisting us. I can still feel the excitement of expecting to see bugs underneath. I can still feel the confusion when I saw the lettering. I can still feel the exact second that confusion became fear. And I can still see the 3 of us sitting on that curb, waiting for our mom to come back, too scared to go near our own house. That was the day I learned that sometimes the scariest things are not hiding in the dark. Sometimes they are lying face down in your backyard, disguised as something ordinary, waiting for one curious kid with a shovel to turn them over. Before the next witness tells their story, take a moment to subscribe to Nachtmeier Witness. This channel is for the late hours, when sleep is close, but the mind is still awake enough to notice every sound in the room. New true stories arrive here for anyone drawn to strange encounters, uneasy memories, and nights that never felt normal again. Leave a like if the stories have pulled you in so far. Now, let's return to the darkness. She lives in an old townhouse, the kind of place that already feels like it has been holding its breath for a long time. It is not falling apart or anything dramatic like that, but it has all the things old houses have. The floors creak, even when no one is walking on them. The walls make little settling noises at night. Pipes knock sometimes for no clear reason. The stairs complain under your feet, and the attic has always made more noise than an attic should. When I was a kid, none of it really scared me too much. I knew the house was old, and old houses make noise. That was the explanation everyone used, and honestly, it worked well enough. If I heard something above me at night, I told myself it was the attic. If the floor creaked in the hallway, I told myself it was the house shifting. If something sounded like a soft thump from another room, I ignored it. You get used to a house when you grow up around it, even if it has a weird feeling sometimes. The attic was probably the strangest part. It was always mysteriously noisy, especially at night. Nothing loud enough to make you run outside, but enough to make you pause and listen. Small movements, little bumps, the occasional sound that seemed too deliberate to be nothing. But again, it was an old townhouse. Everyone knows old places have their own sounds, and after a while you stop questioning them. You just accept that the house has a voice, and because I had been around that house for years, I never thought of it as truly frightening. Strange, yes, uncomfortable sometimes, sure, but not terrifying. Not haunted in the dramatic way people talk about haunted houses. It was just an old place with old house behavior. At least, that was what I always told myself. Now I am grown up, so things like that should not bother me anymore. That is what I thought anyway. When you are an adult, you are supposed to be rational. You are supposed to understand that creaks are just wood expanding, that shadows are just light, and that weird noises in an attic are usually birds, pipes, wind, or the house settling. You are supposed to be able to stand in a quiet room and not let your imagination take over. That is the idea. Last week, for the first time, I was alone in the house. I had been there many times before, obviously, but never completely alone for a long stretch like that. Usually there was someone else around, even if they were in another room. That makes a difference. You may not realize how much comfort another person brings until they are not there. Even if you are not talking to them, even if they are just moving around somewhere in the house, their presence makes every noise easier to explain. But that day, it was just me. At first, everything felt normal. I was doing ordinary things, and ordinary things have a way of making a house feel harmless. I had breakfast. I moved around the kitchen. I opened the blinds from the outside, because that was how they worked. I watched some TV. I checked Reddit. Nothing about the morning felt creepy. It was just a regular day in an old townhouse, and I was a grown adult, not a scared little kid. The house creaked a little here and there, like it always did, but I ignored it. I had heard those sounds my whole life. A tiny groan from the wood, a pop somewhere in the wall, a faint noise overhead. Nothing worth reacting to. I was comfortable enough sitting there with my coffee, looking at my phone, letting the TV make background noise. Then I went upstairs. That was when I felt the old feeling again. Every time I go up those stairs, I get this strange urge to run. It is hard to explain without sounding ridiculous, but it feels like something is behind me. Not like I actually hear someone chasing me, and not like I truly believe there is a person or thing at my back. It is more like an instinct, a pressure, a sudden need to move faster, to get to the top quickly, as if something might catch me if I take the stairs too slowly. It has always been like that. Even when I was a kid, I used to rush up those stairs. I would tell myself I was being stupid, but my body would still move faster. I would feel that weird panic rising between my shoulder blades, and the only way to make it stop was to get upstairs. I never liked having my back to the lower part of the house. I never liked the feeling of the open space behind me as I climbed. Now I am grown up, and somehow that feeling still happens. I should be over it. I know that. It is just a staircase. It is just an old house. There is nothing chasing me. But as I went upstairs that day, I felt it again. That urge to run, that childish, uncomfortable sense that something was coming up behind me. I did what I always do. I let myself move faster. Not full panic, not sprinting like a lunatic, but enough that I felt the old habit take over. I got upstairs, got dressed properly, and tried not to think about it. Once I was changed, I went back downstairs. By then, the feeling had passed. That is how it usually works. The moment I reach the top of the stairs or come back down into normal light and normal rooms, I can laugh at myself a little. I can tell myself it is just muscle memory from being a scared kid in an old house. Nothing more. I came back down and headed toward the living room. As I turned into the room, I froze. There are 3 chairs lined up against the wall next to the TV. They have always been there. I mean, always. As long as I can remember, those chairs have been in that same place, side by side, pushed against the wall beside the TV stand. They are just part of the room, in the way furniture becomes part of a room after enough years. You stop noticing them, because they are always there. Except now, one of the chairs was not where it was supposed to be. One chair was about 3 feet away from the other 2. It was still against the wall, or at least that is what I thought at first, but it was separated from the others. The gap was obvious. It looked wrong immediately, the way a picture frame looks wrong when it has been moved an inch on a wall you see every day. My brain caught it before I even understood why I was reacting. I stood there staring at it. The first thought was simple. What the fuck? I do not scare easily, or at least I do not like to think I do. I am a skeptic. My mind does not jump straight to ghosts, it jumps to explanations. That is what it started doing immediately. I looked at the chair and tried to figure out why it was not where I remembered it being. Maybe someone had moved it earlier. Maybe it had been like that when I arrived, and I had not noticed. Maybe I had moved it myself without thinking. Maybe there was some completely normal reason, and I just needed to find it. But I did not like it. That was the first real feeling. Not terror, not yet. Just a cold little discomfort. A sense that the room had changed while I was not looking. I quickly checked the house. I was still alone. That should have made me feel better. But it did not. It did the opposite. If someone else had been there, at least the chair would have a reason. Someone could have moved it. Someone could have pulled it out and forgotten to put it back. But there was no one. No family member in another room, no visitor, no one hiding in the kitchen or hallway. The house was empty, except for me, and the chair was still wrong. I went back into the living room and sat at the table, facing the chair. I could not stop looking at it. It was just a chair, and yet it had become the only thing in the room that mattered. The TV, the walls, the table, the blinds, everything else faded into the background. My whole attention was locked on that one chair sitting 3 feet away from where it should have been. I tried to think through it. Maybe I had moved it and forgotten. That was the most reasonable explanation. People do things automatically all the time. Maybe I had pulled it out earlier for some reason. Maybe I bumped it while opening the blinds. Maybe I moved it to reach something, then my mind erased the action because it was unimportant. But the more I looked at it, the less that made sense. The house creaked while I sat there, and I hated it. Normally I would ignore a creak, but at that moment every sound felt personal. The old townhouse seemed to be listening while I tried to explain away something I could not explain. A floorboard popped somewhere. A faint sound came from above. The usual noises suddenly felt much less usual. I got up and looked closer. That was when I noticed another detail. The two other chairs had also moved. They were not exactly where they should have been either. They had shifted the other way, slightly away from the TV stand. That made the whole setup stranger. It was not just one chair pulled out by accident. The arrangement had changed. The three chairs were no longer lined up the way they always were. And there was something on the floor, jammed between the legs of the chairs and the TV stand. That detail bothered me more than it should have, because it proved something. The stuff on the floor was wedged in such a way that if I had moved the chairs myself, I would have noticed. I would have heard or felt something crunching, dragging, or resisting. It was not a smooth little movement that could happen without attention. The objects were positively jammed in between the chair legs and the stand. I stared at that mess and felt my rational explanation weaken. If I had moved the chair, I would remember moving it. If I had shoved the other chairs, I would have noticed the stuff on the floor. If someone else had moved them, there would have to be someone else in the house. But there was not. So I forced myself to mentally retrace everything I had done that morning. I had gotten up. I had checked around to see if anyone was there. I had thrown old coffee in the microwave. I had opened the blinds in the kitchen. Then I had gone into the living room. I remembered hearing the microwave beep while I was outside latching the blinds. I remembered going back inside. I remembered drinking the coffee while watching TV in the living room. And I remembered where I had been sitting. I had been sitting exactly where I was sitting now, facing the chairs. That thought made me uneasy, because it meant I had seen that part of the room earlier. I had looked in this direction while drinking my coffee. I had watched TV with the chairs in my line of sight. If one chair had been 3 feet away from the others at that time, I would have noticed. It was too obvious not to notice. I kept going through the memory. Coffee in the microwave, kitchen blinds, living room blinds, TV, read it, sitting at the table, facing the chairs. Everything felt clear enough. Nothing in that sequence involved me moving a chair. Nothing involved anyone else entering the house. Nothing explained the change. Then something hit me. The chair was not actually against the wall, it was against the door I had opened and closed when I opened the blinds. For a second, I just stared. That realization was worse than seeing the chair moved in the first place. At first, I had thought the chair was still against the wall, just separated from the others. That was strange, but maybe somehow it had always been there and I had not paid attention. But now I saw that it was positioned against the very door I had used earlier. The door I had physically opened. The door I had physically closed. If the chair had been there then, I would not have been able to use that door normally. It would have been in the way. I would have had to move it. I would have noticed it. There was no possible way the chair had been sitting there the entire time. That officially ruled out the idea that it had been there from the beginning. It moved. That was the only conclusion left. The chair had moved after I opened and closed that door. It moved while I was alone in the house. I did not move it. No one else was there, and yet it was now sitting against that door, 3 feet away from the other chairs, like someone or something had dragged it there while I was upstairs. I did not like that. I really did not like that. There is something deeply unsettling about a moved object in an empty house. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It does not have the obvious terror of seeing a figure standing in the hallway. But it is almost worse in some ways, because it creates a problem your mind cannot solve. A chair is an ordinary object. It should stay where it is placed. It should not change positions unless something moves it. And in that house, at that moment, there was no one to blame. I stood there trying to think of anything else. Could the floor be uneven? No, a chair does not slide 3 feet across a room on its own, especially not in a way that also shifts other chairs. Could I have knocked it without noticing? No, the movement was too much. Could the door have pushed it? No, because the chair would have had to be in position already, and I knew I had opened and closed that door earlier. Could vibration from the house move it? Absolutely not. The house creaks, but it does not rearrange furniture. The more I thought, the worse it got. I kept looking around the living room, expecting to notice another change. Maybe something else had moved. Maybe a cabinet was open. Maybe an object had been knocked over. But everything else seemed normal. That made the chair even more disturbing. If the whole room had been trashed, I would assume a person had broken in. If several things were out of place, I could start looking for a practical cause. But this was just enough to be impossible and not enough to make sense. One chair moved away from the others. 2 chairs shifted slightly the opposite way. Stuff jammed between chair legs and the TV stand, and the moved chair resting against a door I had used earlier. I started feeling that same old urge I used to feel on the stairs, except now it was not behind me. It was everywhere. The house felt occupied, not loudly, not obviously, but in that quiet old house way, like something had waited until I was alone, and then made one small change, just to see if I would notice. I hated that thought, because I had noticed. I kept thinking about the attic, all those years of strange noises above us, all the creaks at night, all the times I had told myself old houses make sounds. Suddenly those memories did not feel as harmless. Maybe the house had always been like this. Maybe I had just been lucky enough never to be alone when something physical happened. Maybe the noises were not just noises. I am still a skeptic. I want to make that clear. I still believe most strange things have normal explanations. I know memory is not perfect. I know people can overlook things. I know fear can make a detail feel more important than it is. I know an old townhouse can create 1,000 small sounds that feel eerie if you let them. But I also know what I did that morning. I know I opened that door. I know the chair was not against it then. I know no one else was in the house. And I know I did not move it. That is the part I cannot get around. If someone had asked me before that day whether a chair moving would be enough to scare me, I probably would have laughed. It sounds so small. A chair out of place. That is not exactly the stuff of nightmares. But when you are completely alone in an old house and a piece of furniture is suddenly somewhere it cannot have been before, it feels very different. It feels like proof of presence. Not proof enough for the world, maybe, but proof enough for you. I sat there for a while, staring at that chair, feeling more and more uncomfortable. I did not want to turn my back on it. I did not want to go upstairs again. I did not want to keep checking rooms and confirming over and over that I was alone, because every time I confirmed it, the situation became less comforting. Being alone meant no person had moved the chair. Being alone meant the house itself had no explanation to offer me. The chair stayed there, still and silent, as if it had always belonged in that exact spot. But it had not. That was what kept looping in my mind. It had not been there before. It moved. I did not do it. No one else was in the house, and I do not like that. This happened to me when I was about 6 years old, while my family was living in Turkey because of an Air Force assignment. I was very young at the time, so some parts of the memory are soft around the edges, the way childhood memories often are. But the main image from that night has never really left me. Even now, years later, I can still picture the hallway, the doorway to my parents' bedroom, my father sitting up in bed, and the black shape standing near the foot of the bed. I have spent a lot of time wondering whether it was a dream. That is the easiest explanation, and for a long time I almost wanted that to be true. I was only 6. I had woken up in the middle of the night. Maybe I was half asleep. Maybe I had been sleepwalking. Maybe my brain created something strange in that space between dreaming and being awake. I understand all of that. But there are parts of the story that do not fit neatly into a dream, especially because my mother remembers the night too, just from a different point of view. At the time, we were living in military housing in Turkey. I do not remember every detail of the home, but I remember enough to know the layout in the way children remember places. I knew where my room was. I knew the hallway. I knew the path to my parents' bedroom. The house had that strange quiet that military housing can have at night, especially when you are a child far from the country you were born in. Everything felt both normal and unfamiliar at the same time. It was our home for that period of life, but it was still a place we had been placed into because of my father's assignment. That night, I woke up in the middle of the night. I do not remember what woke me. There was no loud crash, no voice calling my name, no storm outside, no clear reason that pulled me out of sleep. I just woke up. Or at least I think I woke up. That is one of the strange things about the memory. I felt awake, but there was no strong emotion at first. I was not scared when I opened my eyes. I was not confused. I did not feel like I had heard something and needed to investigate. There was no conscious thought in my mind that said, "Get up," or "Go to Mom and Dad's room." I simply got out of bed. It almost felt automatic. I walked down the hallway toward my parents' bedroom. I did not run. I did not call out. I just moved through the house as if something had guided me there, though I do not mean that in a dramatic way. It was more like my body knew where it was going before my mind had any reason for it. I have considered the possibility that I was sleepwalking, because that would explain the quiet, almost blank feeling I had. But I also remember feeling awake. I remember seeing things clearly. I remember standing in the doorway and taking in the scene in front of me. When I reached my parents' bedroom, I stopped in the doorway. Both of my parents were awake. That was the first strange thing. They were not asleep, and they were not just slowly waking up because I had appeared at the door. My father was sitting up in bed, alert, and both of my parents were looking toward the foot of the bed. Their attention was fixed on something in the room. They were not looking at me at first. They were not asking why I was awake. They were focused on whatever was in front of them. Then I saw it. In front of their bed was a black shape. It is hard to describe, because it was not like seeing a person in black clothes, and it was not like seeing a shadow cast on the wall or floor. It had the outline of a human body, but it did not have depth. It looked flat, almost like a chalk outline of a body, except instead of being white, it was filled in with black scribbles. That is the closest way I can explain it. It looked like someone had drawn the shape of a person and then violently scribbled inside the outline until there was nothing there but darkness. The edges were not smooth. They were messy and jarring, almost sharp in the way they broke up against the room around it. It had a human shape, but it did not feel human. There was no light reflecting off it. No shine, no fabric, no skin, no texture. It was just black. Not dark gray. Not a shadow with soft edges. Black, it seemed to be standing or crouched near the foot of the bed, caught in a strange pose. The way I remember it, the posture was exaggerated, almost like it had been walking quietly along the floor and had suddenly looked up because it had been noticed. That is what made it feel so wrong. It was not simply standing in the room like a normal figure. It looked caught, interrupted, like it had been doing something it should not have been doing. I do not remember seeing the front of its face. I do not think it was looking at me, at least not directly. In fact, I am not sure it had a face at all. Aside from the outline of its head and body, it was featureless. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, no expression. Nothing that made it a person. It was just a black human-shaped absence in the room, positioned near the foot of my parents' bed while they stared at it. I do not remember feeling fear in that moment, which is another strange detail. You would think a 6-year-old seeing something like that would scream or cry or run away, but I did not. I saw it, but I do not remember feeling the dark pressure my mother later described. I do not remember my body freezing from terror. I do not remember any strong emotional reaction at all. I simply stood there and watched. Maybe because I was so young. Maybe because I was not fully awake. Maybe because whatever my parents felt was not reaching me in the same way. My father began to pray. At the time, my family was Mormon. I am no longer Mormon now, but that is the context of what happened. My father said a Mormon priesthood prayer, commanding the entity to leave the house. I do not remember the exact words, and I do not want to pretend I do, but the basic meaning was clear. He commanded whatever was in the room to leave in the name of Christ. It was not a soft prayer asking for comfort. It was a command. It had authority in the way he said it, the way someone speaks when they believe they have the right to order something out. I stood in the doorway while he said it. Then the black shape flew out the window. It did not sprout wings. It did not run. It did not jump in a way where I saw legs bend or arms move. It just became a blur and went out through the window. That is why I say it flew. It did not touch the ground as it left. One moment it was there near the foot of the bed, black and flat and human-shaped, and the next it shot toward the window in a blur and was gone. I remember that part clearly because it was so sudden. There was no long struggle, no dramatic scene, no sound that I can recall. It was just there, then moving, then gone. The window became the direction of its exit, and after that, the room felt different. My father looked toward the doorway. That was when he saw us. He said, "Go to bed, girls." Until that moment, I did not realize my older sister was standing behind me. She was 9 at the time. I looked up or turned enough to see her there in the hallway, behind me, also awake, also drawn to the doorway somehow. I do not know how long she had been there. I do not know if she saw what I saw. I do not know if she woke up the same way I did, or if she followed me down the hall. I only know that when my father told us to go to bed, she was standing there, and we did what he said. We went back to bed. We did not talk about it that night. There was no long conversation in the hallway. My parents did not sit us down and explain what had happened. My sister and I did not whisper about it in our room, at least not that I remember. We simply went back to bed as if that was somehow the normal thing to do after seeing a black figure fly out of a window. That part feels strange to me now. As an adult, I think I would have 1,000 questions. I would want to know what my parents saw, what they felt, why we were awake, what that thing was, and whether it had happened before. But children often accept adult instructions in moments of confusion. My father said to go to bed, so we went to bed. Maybe we were too stunned to ask questions. Maybe the house felt normal again once it was gone. Maybe we were still half asleep. For years, the memory stayed with me in a quiet way. It was not something I talked about constantly. It was not a story I told everyone. It sat in the back of my mind as one of those impossible childhood moments that I could not fully place. Sometimes I would think about it and wonder if I had dreamed the whole thing. Maybe I woke up only at the end, when my parents told me and my sister to go back to bed. Maybe the black shape was part of a dream, and my memory stitched it together with a real moment of standing in the doorway. That explanation made sense in some ways. Children have vivid dreams. Nighttime memories can blend with imagination. Waking up in the middle of the night can create confusion, especially if something stressful is happening in the house. I was open to the idea that maybe my mind had created the visual part. Maybe my parents were awake for some normal reason, and my child brain turned the scene into something paranormal. But then I talked to my mom about it about a year ago. I brought it up partly because I wanted to know if it had really happened. I was somewhat convinced that it might have been a dream, and that I had only fully woken up when my parents sent me back to bed. I expected my mom to maybe say she did not remember it, or that I had dreamed something, or that she and my dad had simply been awake for some unrelated reason. Instead, she remembered the night. Her memory was different from mine, but it lined up in a way that made the whole thing more unsettling. She told me that she and my dad woke up with a terrible, pressing, dark feeling in the room. She did not say they saw a black figure the way I did. She never saw anything with her eyes, but she felt something strongly. She described it as a heavy, dark presence, something oppressive in the room with them. It seemed to be coming from somewhere in front of them, near the foot of the bed. That matched where I had seen the shape. My mom said the feeling was so strong that my dad said a prayer to make it leave. Again, from her perspective, it was not about something visible. It was about the presence, the pressure, the dark feeling in the room. My father prayed and commanded it to leave. Then, after that, they saw us standing in the doorway. That conversation changed how I thought about the memory. My mom had not seen the figure, but she had felt it. I had seen the figure, but I had not felt the darkness. That detail is still strange to me. It was like we experienced different parts of the same event. My parents woke up because they felt something. I woke up, or sleepwalked, or was drawn there, and saw something. My sister was there too, though I have not talked to her about it, so I do not know what she remembers. My mom's version made it harder to dismiss the event as just a dream. If I had completely invented the black shape, why did my mother remember a terrible presence in the exact area where I saw it? Why did my father say a prayer commanding something to leave? Why did he tell us to go back to bed afterward? Those details were not just in my head. Something happened that night, even if we did not all perceive it the same way. I have not talked to my sister or my dad about it. I do not think they would want to discuss it, and to be honest, I am not sure I want to push them. Some families have events that sit quietly in memory, and everyone knows not to pull too hard at them. My dad may remember it clearly. He may not. My sister may have seen the same thing I did, or maybe she only remembers standing behind me in the hallway. I do not know. Part of me wants answers. Another part of me is afraid that answers might make it stranger. I also think about how my father reacted. He did not panic. He did not yell for us to run. He did not turn on all the lights and search the house. He used the religious authority he believed in and commanded the thing to leave. Whether someone believes in Mormon priesthood power or not, that was his response in the moment, and according to my memory, the shape left immediately afterward. Because I am ex-Mormon now, I look back on that part with complicated feelings. I do not interpret everything the same way I might have if I had stayed in the church. I am not trying to use this story as proof of a religion or doctrine. That is not how I think about it. But I also cannot deny that in that moment, my father's prayer was part of what happened. He believed he was commanding something dark to leave in the name of Christ, and then the shape was gone. I do not know what to do with that. Maybe the power was in his belief. Maybe the thing responded to the command. Maybe my child mind connected the prayer and the disappearance in a way that made sense to me. Maybe there is an explanation that has nothing to do with religion at all. I do not know. I only know how the memory has stayed with me. The image of the shape is the clearest part, not a shadow, not a person, not smoke. A black, flat, scribbled outline of a body with messy edges and no depth. A human shape without features, caught in front of the bed like it had been interrupted. It was not like the ghosts people describe as pale women or transparent figures. It was more like an absence wearing the outline of a person, something that did not reflect light because there was nothing there for the light to touch. That visual has bothered me more as I have gotten older, not less. As a kid, I accepted it because children accept strange things more easily. As an adult, I understand how wrong it was. I understand that seeing a featureless black human outline in your parents' bedroom at night is not normal. I understand that my parents waking with a pressing dark feeling at the same time makes the whole thing harder to explain. I also think about the way it left. It did not walk out. It did not fade away. It flew or shot out the window as a blur, without limbs moving, without touching the ground. That detail makes it feel even less like a person or a normal shadow. Shadows do not decide to leave through windows. People do not blur out of rooms without moving their bodies. Whatever I saw behaved like something that did not belong to ordinary physical rules. Could it have been a dream? Maybe. I still have to leave that possibility open. I was 6 years old, and memories from that age are not perfect. It could have been a mix of sleepwalking, fear, religious atmosphere, and a real moment of my parents being awake and praying. Maybe my mind filled in the shape afterward. Maybe I heard stories later and shaped the memory around them, though I do not remember that happening. But my mother's confirmation makes it difficult to fully dismiss. She did not tell me I dreamed it. She did not laugh it off. She remembered waking to something dark and oppressive in the room, something coming from the same direction where I saw the black shape. She remembered my father praying. She remembered seeing us after. That is enough to make me believe that at least the core of the event was real. I sometimes wonder why my sister and I woke up. Was it random? Were we both sleepwalking? Did the same dark feeling reach us somehow, even if I did not feel it consciously? Did whatever was in the room draw us there? Or did something else wake us so we would witness it leaving? I have no idea. The fact that my sister was standing behind me is one of the strangest details, because I did not even know she was there until my dad told us to go to bed. 2 children waking up and going to the same doorway at the same time is strange enough on its own. 2 children doing that while their parents are awake in bed. Praying away a dark presence is something else entirely. I do not have a neat ending for this story. There was no long haunting afterward that I remember. No repeated visits from the black shape, no family investigation, no dramatic confrontation. We simply went back to bed, and life continued. Maybe that is why the memory feels so isolated and unreal. It was one night, one event, one image that appeared and vanished. But some memories do not need to repeat to stay with you. This one stayed. Even after leaving the church, even after growing up, even after learning to question childhood memories, that night remains one of the strangest things I have ever experienced. I do not know if what I saw was a spirit, a shadow being, a dream figure, or something else entirely. I do not know why my parents felt it while I saw it. I do not know why it was in their room, or why it left when my father commanded it to leave. All I know is that when I was 6 years old in Turkey, I woke up in the middle of the night and walked to my parents' bedroom. My father was sitting up in bed. My mother was awake beside him. Both of them were focused on something near the foot of the bed. I saw a black, featureless, human-shaped figure there, flat and scribbled looking, like a dark chalk outline with messy edges. My father prayed and commanded it to leave. Then it became a blur and flew out the window. After that, my father looked at me and my sister standing in the doorway and calmly told us to go to bed. So we did, and we never really talked about it again. When my grandfather was only a few years old, he lived with his mother and his grandmother. He was still very young, too young to understand the full weight of the things happening around him, but old enough to remember fear. Some childhood memories fade as people grow older, but certain moments stay clear forever because of how deeply they scare you. This was one of those moments for him. It was not a ghost story exactly, and it was not the kind of story with a monster hiding in the dark. It was something much more real, and in some ways that made it worse. His father had abandoned the family when my grandfather was born. From what I understand, his father was not really part of his life after that. My grandfather grew up without him, raised by the women in his family, and that absence shaped the background of everything. It was not just that his father was gone, it was that there was always this empty space where a father should have been. A man who existed, but was not there. A man whose name and face probably carried a strange kind of weight in the family, even if no one talked about him much. Back then, life was very different from the way most of us know it now. The house they lived in was old and simple, and the setup of it sounded strange when my grandfather described it. There were rooms upstairs, but they were not connected to the lower floor in the normal way. You could not just walk up an indoor staircase to reach them. To get to the upstairs rooms, you had to go out through the front door of the bottom floor and climb a ladder outside. He said it was basically like a hayloft. That description always stuck with me because it makes the place feel less like a regular bedroom and more like some rough, separate space above the house. It was not sealed off the way modern rooms are. There was not really a proper door to it. Instead, there was just a sliding piece of wood that could be moved back and forth to cover the entrance. That was all that separated the sleeping area from the outside. A piece of wood, a ladder, and darkness. To a child, that kind of setup must have felt normal if it was all he knew. Children accept the world they are born into. If your room is reached by climbing a ladder outside, then that is just how your room works. If your door is a sliding wooden panel, then that is just your door. But as an adult hearing the story, it is impossible not to think about how vulnerable that made a little boy sleeping in an upper room with no real door, reachable from outside by anyone who knew the ladder was there. One night, after dinner, everything seemed ordinary. My grandfather had eaten with his mother and grandmother. I imagine the evening was quiet, like many evenings in old houses were. Maybe there was the smell of food still hanging in the air. Maybe his mother and grandmother were cleaning up after the meal, talking softly, doing whatever had to be done before bed. He was just a little boy, probably tired after the day, and when it was time to sleep, he went up to the loft-like room. He climbed the ladder outside and went into the upstairs sleeping area. The sliding wood was pulled across the entrance, and he went to bed. There is something unsettling about imagining that part. A small child leaving the warmth and safety of the downstairs room, stepping outside into the night, climbing a ladder, and going into a dark upper space to sleep alone. Maybe that was normal back then, but it feels lonely now. It feels exposed. Below him, his mother and grandmother were inside the house. Above, he was separated from them by walls, height, a ladder, and a piece of wood. At some point in the middle of the night, he woke up. He did not wake up slowly. He woke up because something was happening. A man was in the room. The man was trying to get him out of the bed. For a little boy, that must have been pure terror. One moment he was asleep, and the next, there was a grown man standing over him in the dark, pulling at him, lifting him, trying to take him away. He may not have understood what was happening at first. Sleep can make fear confusing. Maybe he thought he was dreaming for a second. Maybe he tried to cry out. Maybe he was too shocked to make a sound. But the man did not hesitate. He got my grandfather out of the bed and lifted him over his shoulder. That detail makes the story feel painfully real. It was not a shadow at the door. It was not someone watching from a corner. The man physically picked him up. My grandfather was small enough to be carried like that, helpless over a grown man's shoulder. He could not fight him. He could not get away on his own. He was just a child, half awake in the dark, being carried out of his bed by someone who had entered from outside. The man then started toward the entrance. He carried my grandfather out through that opening and began to climb down the ladder. The danger of that moment is hard to overstate. If the man had reached the ground and gotten away into the darkness, my grandfather might have disappeared. There were no cell phones, no cameras, no quick emergency alerts, no easy way to track someone running through the night with a child. Once he was gone, he might have been gone for good. And because the upper room could only be reached from outside, the man had already done the hardest part. He had gotten up the ladder, entered the sleeping space, picked up the child, and started back down. He was seconds away from escape. Then, the front door swung open. My grandfather's mother and grandmother came out. I do not know what woke them. Maybe they heard movement on the ladder. Maybe they heard the sliding wood move. Maybe my grandfather made a sound without remembering it. Maybe a mother's instinct told his mother something was wrong. Whatever the reason, they came out at exactly the right moment. The front door opened, and there they were. The man was on the ladder with my grandfather over his shoulder. Caught. In that instant, everything changed. The man had been moving through the dark with control, but the moment those women appeared, he lost it. He dropped my grandfather. That part is frightening too. He was still on or near the ladder, and the man simply let him go. I do not know how far he fell or whether he was hurt, but the fact that he was dropped at all shows how quickly the man went from kidnapping to escape. He was not concerned with the child's safety. He only cared about getting away. After dropping him, the man took off running into the darkness. He did not stay to explain. He did not try to claim he had a right to be there. He did not fight with the women. He ran. That alone says enough. Whoever he was, he knew he had been caught doing something wrong. My grandfather was saved because his mother and grandmother came out in time. He was almost kidnapped. That is the plainest way to say it, but the reality behind it is horrible. A little boy, asleep in bed, was taken by a man in the middle of the night. He was carried out and down a ladder and only escaped because two women appeared at the exact moment before the man could vanish into the night. If they had slept through it, if they had come out 1 minute later, if they had ignored whatever sound woke them, his life could have gone in a completely different direction. What makes the story even stranger is what my grandfather believed about the man. He said he thinks it was his father, not a stranger, not some random criminal passing through. His own father, the man who had abandoned him when he was born, coming back in the middle of the night to take him. That possibility makes the whole story feel heavier. If it was a stranger, the story is terrifying but simple. A bad man tried to kidnap a child and failed. But if it was his father, then it becomes something more complicated and darker. A man who had left his family may have returned secretly. not to apologize, not to ask to see his son, not to speak to the boy's mother, but to steal the child away while everyone slept. I do not know if my grandfather ever knew for sure. Maybe he recognized something about the man. Maybe he saw his face in the moonlight or in the dark. Maybe his mother and grandmother suspected it afterward. Maybe there had been tension in the family, or fear that his father might try something like that. Maybe the man disappeared too quickly for anyone to prove anything. But my grandfather believed it, and sometimes belief comes from details that are hard to explain to others. A child may not fully understand a situation, but he can remember the feeling of a person. He can remember a voice, a smell, the shape of a body, the way someone moved. Maybe there was something familiar about the man even in that terrifying moment. Maybe he did not understand it then, but later, as he grew older and learned more about his father, the pieces came together. The thought of it being his father makes me wonder what kind of life my grandfather had around that absence. Did his mother fear that the man would come back? Did his grandmother watch the doors more carefully after that night? Was the outside ladder removed or guarded somehow? Did they stop letting him sleep upstairs? Did they talk openly about what happened? Or did they keep it quiet, because family pain is often buried? I do not know all those answers. But I know the story stayed with him. It is the kind of thing that would stay with anyone. Imagine being a child and waking up to someone taking you from your bed. Imagine being carried through the dark, too small to stop it. Imagine seeing the ground below as the man starts down the ladder. Imagine the sudden opening of the door, the sight of your mother and grandmother, the panic of the man dropping you, and then watching him disappear into the night. Even if you survived, even if you were safe afterward, that kind of fear becomes part of you. It also changes the way you understand safety. Children are supposed to believe that bed is safe, that home is safe. That night is just something you sleep through until morning. But after something like that, how could you ever feel completely safe again? How could you sleep in an upstairs room with only a sliding piece of wood over the entrance? How could you hear a sound outside and not wonder if someone was climbing the ladder? The house itself must have felt different after that. Before, the ladder may have been just a ladder. The loft may have been just a place to sleep. The sliding wood may have been enough of a door because nobody expected danger. Afterward, every part of that setup would have seemed frightening. The same path that let my grandfather go up to bed also allowed someone else to reach him from outside. The same opening that gave access to the room nearly became the way he was taken from his family. That is what makes the story so disturbing to me. The danger came through something ordinary. It did not require breaking a lock or forcing a door. The house was built in a way that made the child's room vulnerable, and someone used that vulnerability. I also think about my grandfather's mother and grandmother. They must have been terrified. To open the front door and see a man carrying your child or grandchild down a ladder in the middle of the night is the kind of sight that would haunt a person forever. Their reaction saved him, but I wonder what they felt afterward. Relief, anger, fear, guilt, all at once. Did they blame themselves for letting him sleep up there? Did they stay awake the rest of the night? Did they check the darkness outside over and over, afraid the man might come back? And if they suspected it was his father, that must have added a different kind of fear. A stranger might not return. A father with a claim, even a cruel or selfish one, might. If he wanted the child badly enough to sneak into the house at night, what would stop him from trying again? Maybe that was why the memory stayed so strong in the family. It was not just a close call. It was a warning that someone from the past could still reach into their lives. There is also something especially sad about the idea of a father trying to take his son that way. If he really wanted to be in the child's life, There were other ways. Hard ways, maybe, painful ways, but honest ways. Instead, if my grandfather's belief is true, he came like a thief in the night. He did not come as a father. He came as a kidnapper. That is a hard thing to carry. Maybe my grandfather believed it was his father because that was the only explanation that made sense emotionally. Maybe he needed the man to be someone connected to him, not some random evil stranger. Or maybe he knew. Maybe his family knew. Maybe they simply could not prove it. Either way, the story leaves a mark. There are no ghosts in it, but it has the same feeling as a haunting. A man from the past appears in the dark. A child is taken from his bed. The family rushes out at the last second. The man drops the child and vanishes into the night. Afterward, the question remains, who was he? And if he was the father, why did he come that way? I imagine my grandfather growing older with that memory sitting somewhere inside him. Maybe he did not think about it every day, but it was always there. A reminder that his life almost changed before he was old enough to understand. A reminder that his mother and grandmother saved him. A reminder that the man who should have protected him may have been the one trying to take him. The story is simple when told quickly. A little boy slept upstairs in a loft-like room. A man came in at night and tried to carry him away. His mother and grandmother caught the man as he climbed down the ladder. The man dropped him and ran. My grandfather believed it was his father. But when you sit with the details, it becomes much more chilling. The outside ladder, the sliding wooden cover instead of a real door, the child sleeping alone, the man entering quietly, the weight of the child over his shoulder, the dark yard below, the front doors swinging open, the women stepping out just in time, the child falling or being dropped, the man disappearing into the darkness. That is not the kind of fear you forget. I do not know what happened afterward, and I do not know if anyone ever found the man. I do not know if my grandfather's father ever admitted anything, or if he stayed gone forever. Maybe the truth died with the people who knew more. But my grandfather carried the belief that the man had been his father. And that belief gives the story its sharpest edge. Because sometimes the scariest person is not a stranger. Sometimes it is someone who is supposed to belong to you. Someone who should have loved you enough to stay. Someone who left, then came back in the worst possible way. My grandfather survived that night because his mother and grandmother woke up, opened the door, and saw what was happening before it was too late. Without them, he might have vanished into the darkness with a man he may or may not have known, taken from the only home and family he had. That is why the story still feels so unsettling. It is not just about a kidnapping that almost happened. It is about how close it came to work. When I was around 8 years old, my younger brother and I shared a bedroom. He was about 5 at the time. We had a set of bunk beds, and I slept on the bottom while he had the top. I remember the room pretty clearly even now. The beds were against one wall, his dresser was across from mine, and there was a small nightstand next to my bed with a lamp on it. It was an ordinary kid's room. Nothing about it ever felt especially creepy before that night. I was always the kind of kid who scared easily in the dark. I had a big imagination. Every shadow could become something. Every strange noise had a story behind it. Even though I tried to act brave, I was still just an 8-year-old girl who believed monsters could exist if the lights were off long enough. One night, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I started hearing a scratching sound under my bed. At first, I told myself it was probably a mouse. We lived in an older house and mice weren't impossible. It made sense. Scratching under the bed. Mouse. That's normal. That's logical. But even though that explanation was reasonable, it didn't stop my heart from starting to race. The scratching continued. It wasn't just a soft little sound. It was persistent. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Like something was moving around directly beneath me. I tried to ignore it. I pulled the blankets up higher. I rolled onto my side. I squeezed my eyes shut and told myself to just go back to sleep. But it kept getting louder. After a few minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I sat up in bed and turned on the lamp next to me. The room filled with that warm yellow light, and for a second, I felt relief. Light makes everything feel safer when you're a kid. I did not look under the bed. There was absolutely no way I was going to look under the bed. I don't care how brave someone thinks they are at 8 years old. You do not voluntarily look under the bed when you've been hearing scratching under it. Instead, I looked around the room, trying to find anything that might explain the noise. That's when I noticed my brother's dresser. One of his drawers was open. Now, that might not sound like a big deal, but I distinctly remember that it had been closed when we went to bed. Even at that age, I had a kind of obsessive habit about doors and drawers being shut. I hated things being left open. It bothered me. I would double-check things before bed sometimes, so seeing that drawer open immediately stood out to me. Still, I tried to stay calm. Maybe my brother had gotten something out of it after I fell asleep and forgot to close it. He was 5. 5-year-olds forget things. That explanation made sense. I clung to that. Then I looked at the shelf on top of his dresser. My grandmother made dolls. She was incredibly talented at it and had made me several over the years. They weren't toys in the usual sense. They were display dolls, delicate and detailed, meant to sit on little stands and look pretty. By that point, I had around 6 of them in the room, except they weren't on the shelf anymore. They were all on the ground. They had fallen off their little stands and were lying on the floor, all of them. I just stared at them. That part didn't make sense. Dolls don't just fall off stands all at once. There wasn't any shaking, no earthquake, no loud crash that would have knocked them down. They were just down there, and one of them was missing. I remember feeling that strange cold feeling in my stomach when something isn't right, but you can't explain why. I thought about getting up to fix them. I hated disorder. I wanted to put them back where they belonged. But before I could move, I heard the scratching again, louder, closer, and in that moment I thought, no, absolutely not. I am not getting out of this bed. I laid back down, pulling the blanket up to my chin. That's when I heard growling. It was low and rough, not loud like a dog barking, not high like a cat. It was deeper. It came from under the bed. I felt it in my chest more than I heard it clearly. The sound made every hair on my body stand up. Instinct took over. I pulled the blankets completely over my head. At that age, the blanket was protection. It was a barrier. Monsters couldn't get you if you were fully covered. That was the rule. I curled up tight, hiding under the covers, trying to make myself as small as possible. Not even a minute later, I felt something at my feet. It tugged on the blankets. Hard. My entire body locked up. I pulled my knees up to my chest and rolled into a tight fetal position. I started crying silently at first, hoping maybe it would stop. But whatever it was didn't stop. It started climbing. I could feel weight moving up my body under the blanket. Not heavy like a full-grown animal, but solid enough that it wasn't just fabric shifting. It crawled from my feet toward my legs. Then I felt claws. They weren't just pressing into the blanket. They were pressing into me. Sharp points pushing through fabric and into my skin. Not slicing deeply at first, but puncturing. Little stabs along one side of my body as it moved upward. I could feel each one. It moved up my legs, over my stomach, across my chest. The blanket shifted with it. I could feel its shape pressing against me. Small, compact, and wrong. It reached my head. Then it started tugging at the blanket covering my face. It was trying to pull it off. That's when I finally screamed. I screamed as loud as I could. The moment I screamed, I felt it jump off of me. It moved fast. In the process of pushing off, its claws dug deeper into my skin. I felt sharp pain along my side, like something had gripped and then launched itself away. My brother woke up immediately above me. He leaned over the edge of the top bunk and asked what was wrong. I was crying hard at that point. I didn't want to scare him. He was only 5. I didn't want him thinking there was something in the room. So I told him I'd had a bad dream. Even though I was wide awake, my dad came into the room within seconds. He asked what happened. He looked around. He picked up one of my dolls. Then he found the missing one. It was in the hallway outside our bedroom. That part still makes my stomach turn. Those dolls were only for display. We never played with them. There was no reason for them to be off the shelf, and there was definitely no reason for one to be in the hallway. My dad handed it back and told me to calm down. I told him I would explain in the morning because I didn't want my brother to hear it. He tucked us back in and left. I barely slept after that. The next morning, I told him everything about the scratching, the growling, the tugging, the claws, the weight climbing up my body. He listened. Then he told me it was just a bad dream. He said sometimes people have very realistic dreams. He said your body can feel things that aren't there. He tried to be calm about it, not dismissive in a mean way, but in a practical way. Adults don't want to believe their kids were attacked by something unknown in the middle of the night. I didn't argue. Instead, I lifted up my shirt. There were deep gashes where something had pushed off of me, long scratches along one side, and smaller puncture wounds tracing upward along my body. They weren't random. They followed a pattern. From what I could tell, whatever it was had 2 front claws and 1 back claw, like a talon shape. The punctures were grouped that way, 2 close together in front, 1 slightly behind. Again and again along my side. My dad went quiet. He didn't have much to say after that. To this day, I don't know what it was. I've had lucid dreams most of my life. I dream vividly 2 or 3 nights a week. I know the difference between a dream and waking up screaming. I know what sleep paralysis feels like. This wasn't that. I wasn't frozen. I moved. I screamed. I felt weight. And I had physical marks afterward. The weirdest part of all of it, the doll that had been missing and then found in the hallway. It was a dragon, a beautifully made dragon my grandmother had created. And its feet had 3 toes, 2 in front, 1 in back, exactly like the pattern on my skin. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds ridiculous. I know it sounds like a child connecting dots that don't belong together. I'm not saying the doll came to life. I'm not saying a dragon attacked me. I'm just stating the detail that has never sat right with me. No one believes me when I tell this story, except my mom. She has pictures somewhere in her garage of the scratches on my side from that night. I still have faint scars. I still don't know what was under my bed, and sometimes, even now as an adult, if I hear scratching in the dark, I feel 8 years old again, pulling the blankets over my head and hoping whatever it is doesn't climb up this time. I hope this doesn't get dismissed or laughed at, because for my family, this story has never been a joke. It's one of those quiet, deeply personal memories that doesn't need embellishment. It stands on its own. It's simple, almost gentle. But it's also the reason I've never been able to fully dismiss the idea that something exists beyond what we can see. This happened when my sister and I were very little. I'm only 2 years older than she is, so neither of us were old enough to clearly understand everything going on in the world around us at the time. We were just kids, living in our house, surrounded by normal childhood routines, bedtimes, toys scattered across the floor, nightlights glowing softly in dark rooms, the usual small comforts of being young and safe. My maternal grandmother had passed away long before either of us were born. She died from heart disease. I never met her. My sister never met her. We only knew her through photographs and the way my mom would sometimes talk about her. She wasn't some mysterious figure in our lives. She was simply someone who had existed before us, someone important to my mom, someone whose absence was already a fact by the time we came into the world. My mom would occasionally share stories about her mother, but it wasn't obsessive or heavy. It was just normal remembrance, a funny memory here, a comment about how much she missed her sometimes, a casual mention while cooking or cleaning. There was no dramatic build-up around her death, no constant presence of grief hanging in the house. It was just part of our family history. One night, though, something happened that changed the way my mom thought about everything. It was late. The house was quiet in that deep, still way houses get in the middle of the night. My mom was asleep when she suddenly woke up to the sound of my baby sister crying. It wasn't the loud, panicked kind of crying that makes you jump out of bed immediately. It was softer, sad, almost confused. Still, a crying baby in the middle of the night gets a parent moving. My mom got up and walked down the hallway to my sister's room. I imagine the house was dim, maybe lit only by a hallway nightlight or the faint glow from outside filtering in through the windows. The kind of quiet darkness that feels peaceful until something breaks it. She went into my sister's room and gently asked her what was wrong. She probably assumed it was a bad dream. That's what most parents assume first. Nightmares are common. Children wake up disoriented and upset all the time. She asked her, "Did you have a bad dream?" My sister, still very young, looked at her and said something that made my mom pause. She said, "Grandma said she won't be able to come see me anymore." At first, my mom was confused, but not alarmed. She assumed my sister was talking about my dad's mother. That would make sense. My dad's mom was alive at the time. Maybe my sister was upset about not seeing her soon. Maybe she misunderstood something someone said earlier that day. So my mom reassured her gently. She told her something like, "It's okay, we'll go see Grandma tomorrow." But my sister shook her head. She said, "Not that Grandma, your mommy." That's the part that has stayed with my mom all these years. Not that Grandma, your mommy, my mom's mother. The grandmother neither of us had ever met, the grandmother who had died before we were born. My mom said in that moment she felt something shift inside her. Not fear exactly, more like a quiet shock, a strange realization settling in. My sister was too young to fully understand death, too young to craft some elaborate story, too young to understand the emotional weight behind saying something like that. My mom asked her what she meant. My sister calmly explained, in the simple way toddlers do, that Grandma had been coming to see her, that they talked, that she would visit. But now she couldn't come anymore. There was no dramatic flair to it, no glowing figure descriptions, no horror movie energy, just matter-of-fact statements from a small child. Grandma had been coming to see her, and now she wasn't going to anymore. My mom will never forget the way she said it. She said there was no fear in my sister's voice, no imagination running wild, just quiet sadness, like someone saying goodbye to a friend who was moving away. After that night, my sister never mentioned it again. There were no more late-night conversations about Grandma, no more comments about visits. It was like whatever connection had been there simply stopped. When my mom tells this story, there's always a softness in her voice. Not fear, not excitement, just something gentle and thoughtful. It's not told as a dramatic ghost story. It's told as something that happened, something that felt real and meaningful. Neither my sister nor I have any memory of our maternal grandmother. We've seen pictures of her. We know what she looked like. We've heard stories about her kindness, her personality, her laugh. But we have no lived memories. And yet, my baby sister apparently did, at least for a little while. I've thought about this story a lot over the years. I've tried to approach it logically. Children have vivid imaginations. They can pick up on things adults don't realize they're communicating. Maybe my sister overheard conversations. Maybe she saw a photograph and constructed something from it. Maybe she dreamed about her and blended that dream into reality. But there are parts of it that don't sit neatly in those explanations. The specificity of "not that grandma, your mommy." The timing of her saying grandma wouldn't be able to come anymore. The fact that it stopped completely after that. It wasn't like she built an imaginary friend around the idea. It wasn't an ongoing fantasy that lasted for years. It was a short period, quiet and contained, and then it ended. What makes it more powerful for my mom is that her own mother had always wanted grandchildren. She never got to meet us. She died before that could happen. My mom sometimes wonders if, somehow, she got to see us anyway. I know that sounds sentimental, but when something like that happens inside your own family, it's harder to dismiss it as coincidence. It's not flashy. There were no cold spots in the room, no doors slamming, no shadows in the hallway. Just a little girl waking up in the middle of the night, upset because Grandma said she wouldn't be able to visit anymore. Sometimes I think about the idea that maybe children are more open to things adults can't perceive. Maybe when we're young, our boundaries aren't as fixed. Maybe imagination and reality overlap more freely. Maybe that openness fades as we grow up. Or maybe it was something else entirely. All I know is that my mom believes it with her whole heart. She believes her mother came to see her granddaughter. She believes they had conversations. And she believes that one night, whatever that connection was, it ended. I'm not someone who jumps to supernatural conclusions easily. I like explanations. I like logic. I like things that make sense. But this story has always sat quietly in my mind as something I can't fully explain away. It's not scary. It's not dramatic. It's just personal. And it's one of the reasons I've never been able to completely say ghosts aren't real. The stories may be over, but some nights do not end when the video does. The people you heard tonight were not looking for fear. They were living normal lives until one moment changed the way they saw the world around them. Tell me in the comments which story stayed with you the longest. Subscribe to Nockmeyer Witness for more true accounts from people who saw something they wish they could forget. Good night, and if you wake up suddenly, do not assume it was just a dream.